Hello, my name is Michaël Dantinne. I am a professor of criminology in the Department of Criminology of the University of LIèGE in Belgium. And the aim of this presentation is to give you an overview of research I've led with Sophie André, who is a research assistant in our department. And this research was called Transnational Study on the Link Between the Possession of a Firearm and the Rate of Homicides by Firearms. As I know that the topic of firearms is extremely sensitive, I would like to stress one point before getting started. This research was funded by the WSFA, but the role played by the WSFA were strictly limited to the funding. We were the only body responsible for both the methods and the results, data's collection and data's treatment. The only input that was given by the WSFA was to exclude the United States of America of the scope of the research. So let's get started now with a few words about the methods. We had two central questions at the heart of this research. First of all, is there any link between the rate of firearms homicide and the firearms availability? And the other one is there any link between the rate of firearms homicides and the severity of legislation of a given country? To run this research, we've worked on a basis of a sample composed by 52 countries that were selected on three criteria: the population size, the political regime, and the absence of conflict zones within the given country. We have also worked on some confounding variables. For those who are not used to the field of social sciences, a confounding variable is a variable that can interfere or pollute the results that emerge from a research, and I will tell you a few words later about this confounding variable. Our dependent variable was the rate of firearms homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. These figures came from official statistics. Things were a little bit more difficult with our independent variable. The first one was the availability of firearms. There is no reliable statistics for this point, so we have to use a substitutive variable. And this was the proportion of the number of suicides committed by firearms compared to the total number of suicides in a given country. This is a widely used substitutive measure of the availability of firearms. Things were also a little bit complicated for the second independent variable, the severity of the firearms legislation. We used the gun range index because there is no specific index or indicator that focuses specifically on the severity of the legislation, and the gun range index appeared in the scientific literature as the most appropriate way to determine the severity of legislation about firearms. So, a few words about the results now. We have led two kinds of statistical treatments. First of all, the correlations. The results demonstrate that there is absolutely no link, no statistical link, no correlation between, on the one hand, the severity of the legislation and the availability of firearms, and on the other hand, the rate of firearms homicides. This is very important. What we have found is several strong correlations between several confounding variables I've just spoken about before and the rate of firearms homicides. We have made groups of these confounding variables. Among those who are related to economics, confounding variables in the field of economics, we could find several correlation between, for example, the income per inhabitant or the income inequality. These relationship could be summarized like this: the lower the income, the greater the income inequality, the higher the rate of firearms homicides. We can also notice a very strong relationship between infant mortality and the rate of firearms homicides, but I will tell you a few words about this later. Among the group of confounding demographic variables, there were also several strong relationships. For example, the proportion of young men among the population is correlated very significantly with the rate of homicides by firearms. The greater the number of young men among the population, the higher the rate of firearms homicide. About the confounding social variables, there were also several correlations. For example, the average number of years spent at school or the proportion of the population aged over 25 having reached the equivalent of higher education within a given country is strongly correlated to the rate of firearms homicides. I can summarize these relations, stressing that the higher the level of education is, the lower is the rate of firearms homicides. Next to the correlation test, we have also worked on multiple regression tests. And then these tests that aim to determine what are among the variables that were studied, those who predict the best the evolution of the rate of firearms homicides. There was one confounding variable that emerges very sharply. It is infant mortality. What is the relationship, what is the link between infant mortality and the rate of firearms homicides? Infant mortality is depicted in the scientific literature as really the best variable to measure really the poverty of a given country. And this is this poverty that best predicts the rate of firearms homicides much more than the severity of the legislation or the availability of firearms. I cannot conclude without stressing that next to these results that we consider as interesting, several limits surrounded our research. First of all, we used and we investigate variables that were conceptualized ones, and these variables were conceptualized by using different methods. And this implies that some of them are still open to interpretation even if they are widely used in the scientific literature. Moreover, as it is the case in any transnational study, an analysis that is led at the national level may mask regional or local differences that exist within the countries that were studied. And finally, we cannot conclude without underlining that there is really a strong or sharp contrast between the political interest, for example, at the national or the European level, and the scientific interest, both at the national or the European level, concerning firearms homicide. This is very surprising, and maybe this leads to other questions. Thanks for your attention.